True and Untrue. Once upon a time, there were two brothers. One was called True, and the other Untrue. True was always upright and good towards all, but Untrue was bad and full of lies, so that no one could believe what he said. Their mother was a widow and did not have much to live on, so when her sons had grown up, she was forced to send them away, that they might earn their bread in the world. Each received a little knapsack with some food in it, and then they went their way. They walked until evening, and then sat by a windfall in the woods, and took out their knapsacks, for they were hungry after walking the whole day, and thought that a bit of food would taste good. "I think that you'll agree with me," said Untrue, "that we should eat out of your knapsack as long as there's anything in it. After that, we can eat from mine." Yes, True was in agreement with this, so they started to eat. But Untrue stuffed himself with all the best things, while True only got the burnt crusts. The next morning they had their breakfast from True's food, and they ate dinner from it too, and then there was nothing left in his knapsack. They had walked until late that night, and when they were ready to begin to eat, True wanted to eat from his brother's knapsack. But Untrue said, no, that this food was his, and that he had only enough for himself. "Wait, you know that you ate from my knapsack as long as there was anything in it," said True. "Oh, that is well and good," answered Untrue. "But if you are such a fool to let others eat up your food right in front of you, then you must make the best of it. All you can do now is sit here and starve." "Very well," said True. "You're untrue by name and untrue by nature. You have always been that way, and so you will be all the rest of your life." Now when Untrue heard this, he flew into a rage, and he rushed at his brother, and he plucked out both of his eyes. "Now try to see whether people are untrue or not, you blind buzzard." So saying, he ran away and left him. Poor True. There he went walking along, feeling his way through the thick wood. Blind and alone, he barely knew which way to turn, when all at once he caught a hold of the trunk of a great bushy linden tree. He thought for fear of the wild beasts that he would climb the tree and sit there until the night was over. When the birds begin to sing, he said to himself, I shall know that it is day, and I can try to grope on my way farther on. And so he climbed up into the linden tree. After he had sat there a little while, he heard how someone came and began to make a stir and clatter under the tree. And soon after, others came, and they began to greet each other. He found out that it was Bruin the bear, Graylegs the wolf, Slyboots the fox, and Longears the hare, all of whom had come to celebrate St. John's Eve under the tree. They began to eat and drink and be merry, and when they were finished eating, they started to talk to each other. At last the fox said, Let us each tell a little story while we sit here. The others had nothing against that. It would be good fun, they said, and the bear began, for he was the leader. The King of England, said Bruin, had such bad eyesight, he can barely see a yard in front of him. If he would only come to this linden tree in the morning, while the dew is still on the leaves, he would rub his eyes with the dew, and he would get his sight back as good as ever. Very true, said Graylegs. And the King of England has a daughter who is deaf and dumb. If he only knew what I know, he could soon cure her. Last year, she went to divine liturgy. She let a crumb of the Eucharist fall out of her mouth, and a large toad came and swallowed it down. If they would just dig up the chapel floor, they would find the toad sitting right under the altar, with the Eucharist bread still sticking in his throat. If they were to cut the toad open and give the Eucharist to the princess, she would be able to hear and speak again, just like other people. "That's all very well," said the fox. "If the King of England knew what I know, he would not be so badly off for water in his palace. Under the large stone in his palace yard, there is a spring of the clearest water one could wish for, if he only knew to dig for it there." "Ah," said the hare in a small voice, "the King of England has the finest orchard in the whole land, but it does not bear as much as a green apple, for a heavy gold chain is buried circling the orchard 3 times. If he would have dug it up, there would not be a garden like it in all of his kingdom." "Very true, I dare say," said the fox. "But now it's getting late, and we should all go home." So they all went away together. After they were gone, True fell asleep, sitting there in the tree. When the birds began to sing at dawn, he woke up and took the dew from the leaves and rubbed his eyes with it. And thus he got back his sight, as good as it was before Untrue had plucked his eyes out. Then he went straight to the King of England's palace and begged for work and got it right on the spot. One day the king came out of his palace yard, and when he walked a bit, he wanted to drink out of his cistern, for you must know the day was hot, and the king was very thirsty. But when they poured him out a glass, it was so muddy and nasty and foul that the king got quite upset. "I don't think there's ever a man in my whole kingdom who's had such bad water in his yard as I, and yet I bring it from far over hill and dale," cried out the king. "True enough, your majesty," said True. "But if you would let me have some men to help me dig up this large stone which lies here in the middle of your yard, you would soon see good water, and plenty of it." The king was willing enough. They barely had the stone out and dug under it a while before a jet of water sprang out up high into the air, as clear and full as it came out of the conduit, and clearer water has not been found in all of England. After a while, the king was out of his palace yard again, and there came a great hawk flying after his chicken. And all the king's men began to clap their hands and brawl out, "There he flies! There he flies!" The king picked up his bow and tried to shoot the hawk with his arrow, but he couldn't see that far, and he became very upset. "Would to heaven," he said, "there was anyone who could tell me a cure for my eyes, for I think I shall go blind soon." "I can tell you one enough," said True, and he told the king what he had done to cure his own eyes. The king set off that very afternoon to the linden tree, and his eyes were quite cured as soon as he rubbed them with the dew which was on the leaves in the morning. From that time forth, there was no one whom the king held so dear as True, and he had to be with him wherever he went, both at home and abroad. One day they were walking together in the orchard, and the king said, "I don't know why, that I don't, but there isn't a man in England who spends as much on his orchard as I, and yet I can't get one of the trees to bear as much as a green apple." "Well," said True, "if I may have what is buried twisted 3 times around your orchard, and men to dig it up, your orchard will bear well enough." Yes, the king was quite willing. So True got men and began to dig. And at last he dug up the whole gold chain. Now True was a rich man, far richer indeed than the king himself. But still the king was well pleased, for his orchard now bore so that the limbs of the trees hung down to the very ground, and apples and pears sweeter than anyone had ever tasted grew there. The king and True were walking about and talking together on another day when the princess passed them, and the king became quite downcast when he saw her. "Isn't it a pity now that so lovely a princess as mine should not be able to speak or hear?" he said to True. "Yes, but there is a cure for that," said True. When the king heard that, He was so glad that he promised him the princess's hand in marriage and half his kingdom as well if he could cure her. So True took a few men and went into the church and dug up the toad which sat under the altar. Then he cut open the toad and took out the Holy Eucharist and gave it to the king's daughter. And from that hour, she got back her speech and could talk like other people. Now True was to have the princess, and they got ready for the bridal feast. And such a feast had never been seen before. It was the talk of the whole land. Just as they were dancing the bridal dance, in came a beggar lad and begged for a morsel of food. And he was so wretched and ragged that they all crossed themselves when they looked at him. True knew at once and saw it was Untrue, his brother. "Do you recognize me?" asked True. "Where would a person like me have ever seen so great a lord?" answered Untrue. "You have seen me before," said True. "I was the one whose eyes you plucked out a year ago this very day. Untrue by name and untrue by nature. I said it before, and I am saying it now. But you are still my brother, and so you shall have some food. After that, you may go to the linden tree where I sat last year. If you hear anything that can do you good, you will be blessed." Untrue did not wait to be told twice. If True has got so much good by sitting in the linden tree that in 1 year he has come to be king over half England, what good may I get, he thought. So he set off and he climbed into the linden tree. He had not sat there long before the beasts came as before, and ate and drank and celebrated St. John's Eve under the tree. When they were finished eating, the fox wished that they should begin to tell stories. Untrue got ready to listen with all of his might until his ears almost fell off. But Bruin the bear was cross. He growled and said, "Someone has been chattering about what we said last year, and so this time we will hold our tongues about what we know." With that, the beasts wished each other a good night and parted. Untrue was just as wise as he was before, and the reason was that his name was Untrue, and his nature untrue too. The end.